I was standing in the lobby of the Whitfield Grand Hotel in downtown Chicago, 8 months pregnant, wearing a dress I'd bought at a thrift store because that's what we could afford, or so I believed. My husband was beside me in his only suit, the navy one with the slightly frayed cuffs that I'd mended twice. We were there because his company had been hired to do some carpentry work on the hotel's renovation, and the owner had invited all the contractors to the annual gala as a thank you gesture. That's what Thomas told me. That's why we were there, two people who didn't belong, standing among women in diamonds and men in watches that cost more than our mortgage. Then the hotel owner stepped onto the stage, tapped the microphone, and said, "I'd like to thank the man who made all of this possible. The visionary behind this restoration, the CEO of Whitfield Development Group, and my dear friend, Thomas Whitfield. Tom, get up here." The room erupted in applause. Every head turned toward us, toward my husband. My husband, the carpenter. My husband, who drove a 12-year-old pickup truck and packed his lunch in a paper bag every morning. My husband, who told me he couldn't afford a wedding ring bigger than a quarter carat. He was walking toward the stage. Let me go back. Let me tell you how a woman ends up standing in a hotel ballroom, pregnant and barefoot in borrowed shoes, realizing she doesn't know the man she married. I'm 64 now, and I've spent 30 years trying to make sense of what happened. Some stories don't start where you think they do, and this one starts with my mother's voice on the phone. It was 1994. I was 34 years old, working as a bookkeeper for a small accounting firm in Milwaukee. I lived in a one-bedroom apartment above a laundromat. The pipes rattled. The radiator worked when it felt like it. I could hear my downstairs neighbor's television through the floor every night. Game shows mostly, the audience cheering for strangers winning money they'd never have to earn. My mother called every Wednesday evening at exactly 7 o'clock. And every Wednesday, somehow, the conversation found its way to the same destination. Karen's husband just got promoted. They're looking at houses in Brookfield now. 4 bedrooms. Can you imagine? That's great, Mom. I'm happy for them. The Henderson's daughter, you remember Patty? She just had twins. Twins, Linda. She's 28. I'd stare at the water stain on my ceiling that looked like the state of Florida. Good for Patty. I just don't understand what you're waiting for. You're 34. Men want to start families with younger women. That's just biology. Mom, I have to balance these accounts before tomorrow. All I'm saying is that your father, God rest his soul, he would have wanted to walk you down the aisle, and now he can't. And I'm not getting any younger either. She was relentless, and she was right about one thing, if I'm being honest, which took me decades to learn how to be. I was lonely. I was tired of eating dinner alone, tired of holidays where I was the only adult at the kids' table because there wasn't room for a single woman at the couples' table. Tired of my sister Karen looking at me with that soft, pitying expression every Thanksgiving when someone inevitably asked, "So, Linda, anyone special?" So when my mother told me about Thomas Whitfield, I listened. Evelyn Whitfield's son. You remember Evelyn? She used to volunteer at Street Ann's with me before she moved to the North Shore. Her son Thomas, he's a carpenter, does beautiful work, built custom cabinets, restored old houses. Very talented, very handsome. He was married before, briefly, but it didn't work out. She said the woman was after his family's money, what little they had, and left when she realized there wasn't much. Mom, I'm not going on a setup. It's not a setup. It's just coffee. Evelyn says he's a good man, just shy. Terrible at small talk. He works with his hands, not his mouth. I told her you were patient, that you didn't need someone flashy. Something about that last line should have raised a flag, but instead, I heard what I wanted to hear. A man who wouldn't be loud and critical like my father had been before the cancer softened him. A man who worked hard and didn't need to be the center of attention. A man who, because he was just a carpenter without much money, might actually appreciate someone like me instead of looking past me for someone younger, thinner, more exciting. "One coffee," I said. Thomas Whitfield showed up at the diner on Greenfield Avenue in work boots and a flannel shirt with sawdust on the shoulder. He was tall, broad, with hands that looked like they'd built things, real things, not just spreadsheets and excuses. His hair was dark, starting to silver at the temples, and he had these quiet gray eyes that watched you when you talked, really watched, like he was listening with his whole body. He ordered black coffee and a slice of pie. He ate slowly. He didn't interrupt me once during the entire hour. When I talked about my job, about the apartment, about my dream of someday owning a little house with a garden, he nodded and asked simple questions. What kind of flowers? A yard big enough for what? You like older houses or new builds? When I asked about his work, he lit up. The only time in that first meeting I saw real animation on his face. He talked about restoring a Victorian porch in Wauwatosa, how the original woodwork had been painted over 7 times and he'd spent 3 weeks stripping it back to bare oak. He talked about wood like other men talked about cars or football, with reverence and specificity. "I'm not a rich man," he said near the end, not apologetically but matter-of-factly. "I do okay. I keep busy, but I'll never be the guy with the big house and the fancy car. I live above a laundromat," I said. "I think we're in the same tax bracket." He laughed. The first real laugh, sudden and warm, and something shifted in my chest. A door opening that I didn't know was closed. We started dating. Modest dates, nothing extravagant. Diners, not restaurants, walks along the lakefront. He took me to an estate sale once and got so excited about a set of hand-forged door hinges from the 1890s that I thought he might cry. I found it endearing. I found everything about him endearing in those early months. The quiet confidence, the way he'd fix things in my apartment without being asked, the radiator, the leaky faucet, the cabinet door that wouldn't close. He'd just show up with his toolbox and get to work, and afterward we'd sit on my narrow balcony and eat takeout from the Thai place on the corner. His mother Evelyn was warm and welcoming. She lived in a modest ranch house in Glendale, nothing fancy, filled with cross-stitch pillows and family photos. She made pot roast on Sundays and always set a place for me. I was so worried about Tom after the divorce. She told me one evening when Thomas had gone to the garage to fix her garbage disposal. Victoria was a piece of work, only cared about money. When she found out Tom wasn't going to make her rich, she left. Took what she could and disappeared. He was devastated. Stopped trusting people. Stopped trying. That's terrible. But you're different, Linda. I can tell. You see him, the real him, not what he has or doesn't have. That's all a mother wants for her son. I believed her. Every word. Thomas proposed on a Saturday morning in October. No grand gesture. We were at a flea market, and he'd found an antique ring, thin gold band with a tiny sapphire, in a box of old jewelry. He held it up to the light, looked at me, and said, "This reminds me of you. Simple, beautiful, and worth more than anyone realizes. Are you proposing to me with a $15 flea market ring? I'm proposing to you with everything I have." I said yes. I said yes because he was kind and steady and real, because he fixed things instead of breaking them, because he never once made me feel like I wasn't enough. We got married at the courthouse 3 months later. No big wedding. We couldn't afford one. Karen was my witness. Evelyn cried. My mother cried. Thomas wore the navy suit, and I wore a cream dress from a department store sale rack that Karen helped me alter. We bought a small house in West Allis with my savings and a loan Thomas said he'd taken from the bank. 2 bedrooms, a detached garage he immediately converted into a workshop, and a backyard just big enough for the garden I'd always wanted. I planted tomatoes the first spring. Thomas built me raised beds from reclaimed cedar. This was my life. Small and quiet and good. I got pregnant 7 months after the wedding. We weren't trying exactly, but we weren't not trying. When I showed Thomas the test, he picked me up and spun me around in our tiny kitchen, something I didn't think a man his size could do so gently. He put his hand on my stomach even though there was nothing to feel yet and said, "We're going to be okay." The pregnancy was rough. Exhaustion, nausea, swollen everything. I kept working at the accounting firm until month 6, then switched to part-time. Thomas picked up extra jobs, he said. More hours, longer days. He'd leave before dawn and come home after dark, sawdust in his hair, smelling like varnish and sweat. "You're working too hard," I told him. "Baby's coming. We need the money." I never questioned it. Why would I? We were 2 working people trying to prepare for a child. I clipped coupons. I bought baby clothes at consignment shops. Thomas built the crib himself. Beautiful maple, hand-carved spindles, the nicest piece of furniture in our house by far. Evelyn came over every weekend to help me prepare. She organized the nursery, folded tiny socks, made freezer meals for after the birth. She was wonderful, really, the mother-in-law you dream about, always helpful, never pushy, except. Looking back, there were moments. Small things I dismissed because I didn't want to see them. Thomas's phone would ring, and he'd step outside to answer it. Not unusual for a contractor, I told myself. Clients call at odd hours. But sometimes the calls lasted 30 minutes, and when he came back inside, his expression was different, harder, more focused, like a man running calculations in his head. Once, I found a receipt in his jacket pocket for a restaurant I'd never heard of, a place downtown with an $80 steak. Client dinner, he said when I asked. The guy wanted to discuss a big remodel over a nice meal. I didn't pay, he did. And Evelyn's house. It was modest, yes. But the art on the walls, I didn't know much about art, but some of those pieces didn't look like the kind of thing you'd pick up at a craft fair. And her car, a 2-year-old Lexus, seemed like a lot of car for a retired woman living on a fixed income. I noticed these things the way you notice a crack in the ceiling. You see it, you think, I should look into that. And then you forget about it because the baby's kicking and dinner needs to be made and life keeps going. Then came the gala. Thomas told me his contracting company had done woodwork for the Whitfield Grand Hotel's restoration project. He said the owner, grateful for the craftsmanship, had invited all the contractors and their families to the annual charity gala, black tie. We don't have to go, he said. It's not really our scene. No, let's go. When do people like us get to dress up and eat free food? He looked at me for a long moment. Something flickered across his face, something I couldn't read. Okay, he said. Let's go. I borrowed a dress from Karen. Thomas wore the navy suit. I was 8 months pregnant and uncomfortable in every possible way, but I wanted one nice evening before the baby came, and sleep became a memory. The hotel was stunning. Restored to its original 1920s glory, all marble floors and brass fixtures and a ballroom with a ceiling painted like a Venetian palace, Thomas moved through the crowd strangely. People kept approaching him, not like they'd approach a carpenter they'd hired, but like they knew him. Handshakes that lingered, smiles that were too warm, too familiar. Tom, great to see you. Tom, we need to talk about the Lakeshore project. Tom, Evelyn looks wonderful. Where is she tonight? I held his arm tighter. Something was wrong. Something was very, very wrong. And then the hotel owner took the stage and said my husband's name and called him CEO. Thomas walked to the stage. He walked to the stage and shook the man's hand and stood behind the microphone and thanked everyone for coming. Thanked the architects and the designers and the construction crews. And then he said, and most of all, I want to thank my wife Linda, who is here tonight, who has made every part of my life better just by being in it. Every head turned to me. The pregnant woman in the borrowed dress and the shoes that didn't fit right. The woman who thought her husband was a carpenter. The applause was deafening. I couldn't hear it. I couldn't hear anything except the blood pounding in my ears. Thomas came back to me with that same quiet smile, and I looked up at him, at this stranger, and said, "Take me home. Now." The car ride was silent. Not his 12-year-old pickup, I realize now. A rental. He always rented the truck. Our house in West Allis was bought with cash, not a loan. The workshop, the work boots, the flannel shirts, the packed lunches, all of it. Costume, theater, a performance so thorough and sustained that I'd built my entire life inside it. "Pull over," I said. He pulled into a gas station parking lot. I was shaking. My hands, my voice, everything. "Tell me everything, right now. Every single thing you've lied about." He gripped the steering wheel. "My name is Thomas Whitfield. I'm the founder and CEO of Whitfield Development Group. We build commercial properties, hotels, residential complexes. The company is worth, as of last quarter, about $42 million. I thought I might vomit. The carpentry is real. I started as a carpenter. I love the work. But the business grew, and I grew with it. And the act? The poor carpenter routine? Whose idea was that?" Silence. Just one beat too long. "Your mother," I said. "Evelyn. After Victoria, after the divorce, I was wrecked. I thought she loved me. She loved the money. Mom said we needed to be sure the next one, if there ever was a next one, loved me for me. Not for the company. Not for the houses. Not for any of it. So you dressed up like a blue-collar worker and went hunting for a woman desperate enough to marry a carpenter. That's not what it was. That's exactly what it was. My voice was rising. The baby kicked, hard, like punctuation. You tested me. You and your mother sat in her little ranch house, her fake little modest house with the Lexus in the driveway and the original art on the walls, and you watched me struggle. You watched me use my savings. You watched me clip coupons and buy secondhand baby clothes while you sat on $42 million. I was going to tell you. When? When were you going to tell me, Thomas? After the baby. I had a plan. I wanted to. You wanted to what? Surprise me? Like it's a birthday present. Surprise, honey. I've been lying about everything for 2 years, but look, we're rich? He was crying. I'd never seen Thomas cry. The man who built things with his hands, who was steady and strong and quiet, was sitting in a gas station parking lot with tears running down his face. I didn't care. I couldn't care. Take me to my sister's house. He drove me to Karen's. I went inside without looking back. Karen opened the door, saw my face, and pulled me inside without a word. I sat on her couch and I told her everything, and she held me while I sobbed into her throw pillow, and her cat stared at me from the bookshelf like I was making a scene, which I was. He's rich? Karen kept saying. Tom? You're Tom? The guy who built our mom a spice rack for Christmas? $42 million. Jesus. Then I called my mother. It was past 11. She answered on the second ring, which meant she was already awake, which meant she was waiting. You knew, I said. Silence. Mom! You knew. Evelyn mentioned that Thomas wanted to be sure, that he'd been hurt before, and she asked if we could just let things develop naturally without mentioning the business. Naturally. You call this natural? I used my entire savings to buy a house with a man who could have paid cash for the whole block. I thought it was romantic, Linda. A man who wants to be loved for himself, not his money. What's wrong with that? What's wrong is that I didn't get to choose. You chose for me. Evelyn chose for me. Thomas chose for me. Everyone decided what was best for poor, desperate Linda, and nobody asked Linda what she wanted. I hung up. I didn't throw the phone. I was too tired, too pregnant, too broken for dramatic gestures. I just set it on the coffee table and watched the screen go dark. I didn't speak to Thomas for 3 weeks. He called. He sent letters. Long ones. Handwritten on that beautiful stationery that I now realized cost more than my grocery budget. I read them. I couldn't help it. I wasn't as strong as I wanted to be. I know what I did was wrong, he wrote. I know I took your choice away, and I know that's unforgivable. But I need you to know that nothing about how I feel about you was part of the act. The way I love you, that was never pretend. Karen found me a therapist, Dr. Chen, a woman in her 50s with a calm voice and an office that smelled like green tea. She specialized in what she called relational trauma, which sounded clinical enough to make me feel less pathetic about crying in a stranger's office twice a week. I told her everything. The loneliness, my mother's pressure, the relief of finding Thomas, the simplicity of our life together, the discovery, the rage. Dr. Chen listened to all of it, then said, "That's a significant deception. Your anger is entirely justified. Thank you, but I'd like to ask you something difficult, and I want you to sit with it before you answer." I nodded. You described falling in love with Thomas because he was, and I'm using your words, simple, steady, humble, and real. You said you loved that he didn't care about status, that he worked with his hands, that he never made you feel less than for not having money or a glamorous career. Yes. Would you have gone on that first date if your mother had said, "He's the CEO of a $42 million company"? The question landed in my chest like a stone in still water, ripples everywhere. Of course I would have. Would you? Or would you have thought, why would a multimillionaire want a 34-year-old bookkeeper from West Allis? Would you have assumed there was something wrong with him? Would you have been intimidated? Would you have shown up at that diner and been yourself? Or would you have been performing? I opened my mouth, closed it, opened it again. I don't know. Here's what I think, Linda. I think Thomas was wrong to lie. That's not in question. But I also think you fell in love with a version of Thomas that felt safe because he was beneath you economically. You could be the capable one, the equal partner, the woman who didn't need his money. His poverty, real or fake, made you feel secure in a way that his wealth might not have. That's not fair. Fair isn't the same as untrue. I sat with that for a long time. Days. I sat with it while I folded baby clothes. While I organized the nursery that Thomas had built with his own hands. Truly built, with skill and love, even if everything around it was a lie. Was Dr. Chen right? If Thomas had pulled up to that diner in a Mercedes instead of a pickup truck, would I have relaxed into the conversation the way I did, or would I have spent the whole hour wondering what the catch was? Would I have planted tomatoes with a millionaire? Would I have clipped coupons and felt proud of our frugality if I'd known it was theater? I didn't know. I still don't. And that uncertainty is its own kind of honesty. Thomas came to therapy the following week. He looked like he hadn't slept in a month. His clothes were wrinkled, he'd lost weight. The steadiness I'd loved about him was gone, replaced by something jittery and desperate. Dr. Chen set the rules. I could ask anything. He had to answer truthfully. No walking out. Did you enjoy it? I asked first. Watching me be careful with money while you had millions. Did it amuse you? No. His voice cracked. It made me feel guilty every single day. Then why didn't you stop? Because I was terrified of losing you. The longer it went on, the harder it got. After 6 months, I thought, I'll tell her after the wedding. After the wedding, I thought, I'll tell her when things settle down. Then you got pregnant, and I thought, I can't do this to her now. I kept pushing it forward because I'm a coward. That's the truth. I'm a coward who found the best thing in his life and was too scared to risk it. What about the crib? I asked. And this was the question that surprised even me. The crib you built. The one with the hand-carved spindles. Was that real? He looked confused. What do you mean? I mean, did you actually build it? In that garage? With your hands? Or did you have some employee do it and pretend? I built it. Every piece. I spent 4 weekends on those spindles. I cut my thumb on the chisel twice. He held up his hand. I could see the scars. That was real, Linda. The work was always real. I started to cry, which made me angry, which made me cry harder. Because the crib was beautiful, and it was real. And I didn't know how to hold both things at once, the beauty of what he'd made and the ugliness of why he'd made it while pretending to be someone he wasn't. Dr. Chen looked at both of us. Thomas, I need to ask you something. If Linda had been wealthy, if she'd come from money, would you have run the same test? I don't understand. Your mother chose Linda partly because she was modest, hardworking, and unassuming, someone who would be grateful for simplicity rather than suspicious of it. You didn't test a wealthy, confident socialite. You tested a lonely bookkeeper whose mother told her she was running out of time. Do you see the imbalance in that? Thomas went pale. You had all the power in this relationship from day one. The money, the information, the choice. Linda had none of those things. She gave you everything she had, her savings, her trust, her career stability, while you risked nothing. That's not a test of love, that's an exercise in control. The room was silent for a long time. Thomas stared at his scarred hands. I didn't see it that way, he said. But you're right. I confronted Evelyn the following Sunday. I drove to her modest house in Glendale, the one I now knew she owned outright along with 2 other properties, and I sat at her kitchen table where I'd eaten pot roast and believed every lie she'd fed me. You handpicked me, I said. You and my mother. You went through her friends' daughters like a catalog and found the most desperate one. Linda, that's not true. You watched me use my savings. You watched me buy baby clothes at Goodwill. You sat in this kitchen and talked about how Victoria only cared about money, and you used my sympathy against me. Evelyn's composure cracked. Just slightly. A tremor in her hands as she poured tea she wouldn't drink. I was trying to protect my son. You were trying to control who your son married. You wanted someone who would be so grateful, so relieved to finally have a husband, that she'd never push back, never question, never leave, even when she found out the truth, because where would she go? She'd already given up everything. That's not. But here's what you didn't count on, Evelyn. I'm not grateful. I'm furious. And I'm not trapped. I have a sister with a guest room, and I have skills that pay a salary, and if I walk out of this marriage, I will survive. I've been surviving my whole life. That's what you tested for, remember? Resilience. Well, here it is. Evelyn was crying. Quietly, the way women of her generation cry, like they're apologizing for having feelings. What do you want me to do? I want you to admit what you did was wrong. Not misguided. Not overprotective. Wrong. I want you to look me in the face and say you manipulated a lonely woman into marrying your son under false pretenses. It took her a long time, but she said it. Every word. And then she said, I'll do whatever it takes. Therapy, boundaries, whatever you need. I need you to treat me like an adult who chose your son, not a stray dog who should be thankful someone took her in. My mother was harder. She maintained for months that she was just playing matchmaker, that she didn't know the full extent of the deception. We went back and forth in tense phone calls, short visits where the air felt like static electricity. Finally, about a year after the gala, she said something that broke me open. I was scared you'd end up alone, Linda. Like me. After your father died, I was so alone, and I didn't want that for you. So when Evelyn told me about the plan, I thought, well, at least she'll have someone, even if it's not perfect. At least she won't be alone. But I wasn't alone, Mom. I had a life. I had a job and an apartment and a sister and friends. It wasn't glamorous, but it was mine. And you and Evelyn took that from me when you decided it wasn't enough. She cried. I cried. We're better now, but something between us never fully mended. There's a hairline crack that shows when the light hits it right. I moved back to the house in West Allis 9 months after the gala, 2 months after our daughter was born. Her name is Ruth Ann Whitfield. 7 pounds, 4 ounces, my mother's eyes and her father's stubborn chin. She came into the world screaming, and she hasn't stopped making noise since. I love that about her. Thomas slept in the workshop for the first 3 months. He converted it back from a fake carpentry shop into an actual living space with a cot and a space heater. He could have gone to a hotel. He could have gone to any of the properties he apparently owned. But he stayed in the garage 20 feet from his daughter because I told him he could, and because he understood that proximity was all I was offering. He was a good father from the first moment, patient with Ruth's colicky screaming, competent with bottles and diapers, present in a way I hadn't expected from a man who'd spent 2 years lying about who he was. One night, 3 in the morning, Ruth finally asleep after an hour of wailing, Thomas and I were sitting on the kitchen floor, backs against the cabinets, too exhausted to make it to a chair. I keep waiting for you to leave, he said quietly. Some days, I want to. I know, but then I watch you with Ruth, and I think, that's real. The way you hold her, the way you check on her at night, the way you built that crib, that's the real Thomas. It was always the real Thomas. The carpenter, the businessman, they're the same person. I just didn't trust you enough to show you all of it at once. And that's on me. We went to therapy for 3 years. 3 years of Dr. Chen's green tea office and her calm, devastating questions. We rebuilt slowly, not the relationship we had, that one died in the lobby of the Whitfield Grand Hotel, but something new. Something where I knew exactly who he was and chose him anyway. Something where he stopped hiding and I stopped pretending I didn't deserve better than what life had given me. I went back to work, not at the accounting firm. Thomas funded my education, and I got my CPA license at 37. I opened my own practice at 40. It's small, but it's mine, and I built it with my name on the door, and nobody's money but my own. Thomas offered to invest. I declined. Some things you need to earn for yourself. We had a second child. A boy, Nathan, when Ruth was 3, and somewhere in the chaos of 2 children and a marriage held together by honesty instead of illusion, we found something I can only describe as real love. Not the grateful, relieved love I felt when I thought I'd finally found someone who'd have me. Not the controlled, curated love Thomas thought he was engineering, but the messy, difficult, sometimes painful love that comes from knowing someone completely, their worst decisions, their deepest fears, their most selfish impulses, and choosing them anyway. We renewed our vows on our 15th anniversary. Small ceremony, Just us and the kids and Karen and a justice of the peace. No fancy hotel, no gala. Just our backyard in West Allis, the tomato plants behind us, Ruth throwing flower petals and Nathan eating them. "I promise to never hide from you again," Thomas said. "Not behind money, not behind silence, not behind fear. I promise to keep choosing you," I said. "Even on the days I remember, even on the days I'm still angry, even on the days it would be easier to leave." That was 19 years ago. We're 64 and 61 now. Ruth is a lawyer in Minneapolis. Nathan just started medical school. Thomas sold the company 5 years ago, and now he actually is what he pretended to be, a carpenter. He builds furniture in our garage, real furniture, for real people, and he's never been happier. And me? I still have days when it hits me. A flash of memory, standing in that hotel lobby, the floor tilting under my feet, the applause I couldn't hear. Some mornings, I look at Thomas over coffee and see the stranger who lied to me for 2 years. Some nights I look at him and see the man who built a crib with hand-carved spindles and cut his thumb twice and didn't care because he wanted it to be perfect for our daughter. I think about what Dr. Chen said, that I fell in love with a version of Thomas that felt safe. She was right, and he fell in love with a version of me that was grateful enough to stay, and that was wrong. But we outlasted those versions of each other. We stayed long enough to meet the real people underneath. Was it worth it? Ruth called last week to tell me she's pregnant. Our first grandchild. And Thomas, this man who hid a $42 million company behind a pair of work boots, he put his face in his hands and cried like a baby when I told him. Real tears, no performance, no test. Some days I think yes, it was worth every painful minute. Some days I'm still not sure. But it's my life, the one I chose, the one I keep choosing,